South Africa is not ready to recycle solar panels. That's according to the Institute for Futures Research. Scanning team at Stellenbosch Business School, solar panels have a limited lifespan, averaging around 20 and 30 years due to the solar panels' efficiency decreasing over time and therefore requiring replacement. The Institute for Futures Research says solar panel recycling is a relatively new concept and that South Africa needs to recycle these panels is a rather glaring long-term problem with recycling plants ill-equipped to deal with them. The IFR says more than 2.2 billion rands worth of solar panels were imported into South Africa due to the first half of 2022. The Institute says the overlooking of the problem of recycling these panels could result in environmental hazard in 30 years' time. If the IFR says the only 10% of the most widely used panel types are recycled in the USA, while the rest end up in landfills, causing a serious risk to the environment. Let's talk now to Francois Pretorius, a research assistant of the Institute for Futures Research at Stellenbosch Business School. He joins us now. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I was just wondering, as I was reading some of the points of your report, it seems that you're suggesting that this information that these solar panels could result in environmental hazards and that only 10% of them most widely used are recycled in the US. Why is this data not widely available or not known enough in South Africa if this is what we're promoting?
Thank you so much for having me. Look, I think it's a global problem. It's not only a South African problem. One of the main issues is most of the solar panels that have been produced historically are still in use. So it's been a problem that people have known is coming, but essentially now as solar panels, the first generation are reaching the end of life cycle, it's becoming more the glaringly obvious problem. There's movement on it. I mean, the European Union is doing really, really well on it. There is capacity in South Africa already. There are people doing it, but just not at the scale that it's needed in the long term.
You talk about the first generation. I'm just reflecting back to what the finance minister said about the tax break that people can get if they buy new solar panels for their homes. So would these be less damaging to the environment? You say we're gaining capacity for the recycling. So is this generation apt for at least the environment?
Look, I always promote the circular economy. So if you can reuse something, that is the ideal. So definitely, I think before getting rid of a solar panel, if it is still working and in working order, reuse it. So I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. Then, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things in terms of we just wanted to draw attention to the fact that most consumers in South Africa don't actually realize that there is a risk in terms of just dumping these anyway, essentially.
Okay, now I hear that because I see, according to your report, that the pace of imports is set to increase, but the panels that we're talking about contain toxic substances such as lead, cadmium, I think, and these are harmful to the environment. Can you tell us in what manner, and is there control, regulation on the disposal of the reuse thereof?
No, exactly. So, I mean, thank you so much for raising that point. So cadmium, for instance, is found in thin film solar panels, which is not the most used one in South Africa, but I mean, there's elements in all solar panels that could be potentially harmful. The thing is, with regards to that, if that isn't taken care of properly, it ends up in landfill and it actually manages to breach that landfill. It could leak into groundwater sources, and those elements or substances rather, are unfortunately toxic to humans. So it's not good news with regards to that. But the South African government has actually taken heed of all of this, and they've put really good legislation in place, which makes it essentially what they're saying is any provider, importer, manufacturer, etc. of solar panels in South Africa needs to have a plan in place for end-of-life cycle. So they need to take it to an accredited recycler by the end of life. The problem is just at this stage, while there is limited capacity in South Africa, it's not going to be ready for the millions of solar panels that it's coming its way in about 2 decades, maybe 3 decades time.
So what kind of conversations should government, consumers, producers be having in order for South Africa to reap the potential rewards of previous power generating mistakes? And as we mentioned earlier on, I think the market value of panel recycling is about 78 million US dollars. That was in 2021. So that's projected to be at 1.8 billion US dollars in 2031. So sounds like huge amounts of money involved that we could use to, plow back into the mixed energy plan that we have.
Exactly. And I'm so happy you touched upon that, because that is the main point of the article, essentially, is to raise awareness and to say now is the time. At this stage, there's not a big market for it yet, and that's why it's still underdeveloped, because most panels are still in use. But we need to get plans in place, and private sector can definitely step into the fray there and start bigger recycling plants. There's scope for growth with regards to it. Ideally, I would say South Africa can position itself as sort of the recycling hub thing for Africa as well, which would be really, really great, as you said.
Just in terms of the costs of recycling, I believe that the recycling process for solar panels is in itself energy intensive, and that the cost could be more than the potential value of the recycled product. So how do we overcome these challenges?
Exactly. Look, that is one of the main problems at this stage, but there's also a huge amount of research and development going into this, which is making it easier to recycle solar panels. And I do think in the long term that is going to be brought to fruition, actually not even long term, in the next couple of years. So it's essentially a game of the South Africa needs to watch what's happening internationally and adopt it as quickly as possible.
In terms of the value chain of recycling, the current regulation and what we could be looking at improving, while, as you say, having foresight in gaining some sort of a revenue from this and getting as many people off the grid. What is the talk? What have you gleaned through your research?
So through my research, it's going to be an interesting one in terms of, ideally, you would have to build a new value chain altogether in terms of people collecting the solar panels, then transporters, then sifters, then actual recyclers. Then from there, you need to get a secondary market for the parts as well. It is in existence to a certain extent, but it needs to be broadened much more. So it's essentially the putting in place of a massive value chain looking after solar panel waste.
And the current mainstream recycling processes, do they have room, or would that also require overhaul?
So that's where the problem lies, in terms of you can't just send a solar panel to a normal recycling plant. Some of the research shows about 80% of a solar panel is it's easily recyclable. So you're looking at aluminium, glass, etc. Some reports even put it higher at about 90%, some even say higher at 95%. But it's that last little bit that is the problem. In terms of, that is where different processes, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not an engineer, but there's sort of all sorts of different chemical processes, mechanical processes, etc., that could be followed to do that part of the recycling. And that's what differs from normal recycling, and that's where the problem lies at this stage.
Just very briefly, if you were to advise South Africans who are in the market trying to get advantage of that rebate, because obviously it has to be new solar panels, what brand should you be buying?
I'm going to be honest with you. I, I can't be too biased on that, and I don't have enough information, so I'm so sorry, but I can't comment on that.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll have to do our research, but much appreciated for your time and your thoughts speaking to us there about the challenges in recycling. That there is Francois Pretorius, a research assistant at the Institute for Futures Research at Stellenbosch Business School.